There we go.
Thank you. Okay, well, hello, friends. Welcome to this 46th webinar on the Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. This webinar series, oops, can't do it that way. I've got a new operating system and it changes things. My old habits have to be changed. Okay, this webinar series, geez. is available on makara.us under the subheadings Moria Federation webinars, then webinar series in progress as shown here. Previous episodes of this, the Secret Doctrine, and the Treatise on Cosmic Fire series are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald and the webinar you wish to view. You can join any of these webinars on the homepage of MoriaFederation.com, as shown here. Okay, last time we read about the epic struggle between good and evil in the persons of Osiris and Typhon, the latter of whom had fallen from the status of primordial creator god in early Egyptian times to a personification of the principle of corruption, darkness, and the lower realms in the later kingdoms. Quite a bit like Lucifer's fall. We know him in the esoteric literature to be a high sacrificial being, but in the Christian form, he's considered akin to the devil. So you have the same kind of thing that happened with Typhon. So key elements in the myth of Typhon and Osiris include the presentation of this wonderful ornamented box made just the size of the body of Osiris by Typhon, which was presented at a feast where it was offered as a gift to the god whom it fit perfectly. The box is a metaphor for the body taken by Osiris during incarnation, right? For the box represents the move into incarnation. The forces of matter compel Osiris to incarnate. GRS Made even associates the box with a physical permanent atom. When Osiris had lain down in the box, Typhon's 72 co-conspirators leapt forward, nailed him in, sealed the box with lead, then cast it into the Nile, where it floated down to the sea. The Nile is a metaphor for the path into incarnation, which ends in the Sea of Chaos, the manifested world. Esoterically, Typhon, who is associated with one of the stars of the Great Bear, and thus with the first ray, is not evil, but is just carrying out his role in the implementing of the will to be, or the will to incarnate of the Logos. An interesting point is then made regarding the timing of this event, which happened on the 17th day of the month Athir, or Scorpio. In the key of destiny, we learned that Osiris, as the sun god, was associated with the number 1, and Isis, the moon goddess, with the number 7, which together represent spirit taking form, or spirit imprisoned in form. Hence, again, you have the imprisoning casket-like box that Osiris was put in. Isis finally found Osiris's coffin in Byblos, where it had lodged in some branches, which then miraculously grew up around the box. When in other words, it had been it had been integrated into the form world. This principle of solar radiation was integrated into the form world. When the king of Byblos discovered the tree, he was so amazed that he had it cut down and erected as the main support of his palace roof. G.R.S. Mead associates this king with the ruler of the form world, and the erecting of the spirit enclosing tree as the central pillar of his palace, as a due recognition of spirit standing always within the heart of the form world, invisible, but at the heart of the form world. While visiting Byblos, Isis discovers Osiris's body, but it is once again stolen by Typhon, who cut it into 14 parts and scattered them over the earth. According to Gerald Massey, the 14 parts represent the 14 days between the full and the new moon, the most material aspect of the lunar cycle. Massey continues, moreover, the 14 judgment seats in the netherworld and the 14 groups of gods before whom the deceased must appear to be justified by Ta'at, a moon god, represent one half of the lunar houses or signs. After Typhon was slain, the quote, souls of the gods were taken to heaven, where they shone forth as stars. It was supposed that the soul of Isis gleamed from the dog star. We then took a look at Isis's headdress, which represents the empty throne of her slain husband, and more esoterically, the form aspect or seat of spirit, and at representations that depict her as a cow, which accentuates her nurturing aspect and also relates her to Taurus by way of Venus. Taurus is exoteric ruler. Egypt was very much in the height of its rule during the Taurian period. MPH then introduced, yeah?
Sorry. Anne Veronica asks, does that mean that each day from the full moon to the new moon has its own judgment?
Yeah, there would be an association. You'd have to go into Egyptian texts to determine what it is, but the judges in Amenti, let's see, let me go back to that slide. Yeah, here. These judges that sit up here at the top, they would be associated with each one of those days of the full moon, following the full moon. But just how, well, you'd have to take a deep dive into the texts, and then you're going to get the exoteric version of it. But, it would be interesting. I would love to know more about that. Okay. Okay, MPH then introduces the subject of Egyptian alchemy, thought to have been given to the ancients by Hermes Trismegistus, who we took a long look at in the previous chapter. We then look at the illustration at the center page, which describes the sistrum and its ancient ritual usage. And this takes us up to where we left off last time. So if we could get a reader for this next segment.
I'll try once I figure out how to say that first word.
Apuleius.
Apuleius? Apuleius, okay.
Apuleius.
Oh, that's easy. Apuleius describes her as follows. In the first place, then, her most copious and long hairs being gradually imported and promiscuously scattered on her divine neck were softly diffluous. A multiform crown consisting of various flowers bound the sublime summit of her head. And in the middle of the crown, just on her forehead, there was a smooth orb resembling a mirror, or rather a white refulgent light, which indicated that she was the moon. Vipers rising up after the manner of furrows environed the crown on the right hand, and on the left, the cerulean ears of corn were also extended from above. Her garment was of many colors and woven from the finest flax, and was at one time lucid with a white splendor, at another yellow from the flower of the crocus, and at another flaming with a rosy redness. But that which most excessively dazzled my sight was a very black robe, fulgid with a dark splendor, and which, spreading around and passing under her right side and ascending to her left shoulder, there rose a protuberant like the center of a shield, the dependent part of the robe falling in many folds and having small knots of fringe gracefully flowing in its extremities.
Okay, thank you, Bial. So, this is Apuleius's vision that he gets of her, some great being associated with Isis actually presented herself to the astonished eyes of Apuleius, and he wrote in detail what he saw. So that's that's what we're looking at here. So first up, we've got, Apuleius describes her as follows. In the first place, then, her most copious and long hairs being gradually intorted and promiscuously scattered on her divine neck were softly defluous. It's almost comical, this sentence. So, as I mentioned, this is from Apuleius's Metamorphosis, famous book back in the day, wherein Isis comes to him in a vision. So, intorted means twisted inwardly about an axis or fixed point, curled, wound. So there's something of the spiralic motion in that term, intorted. Defluous comes from the Latin defluere, which just means to flow down. Okay. Next, a multiform crown consisting of various flowers bound the sublime summit of her head. And in the middle of the crown, just on her forehead, there was a smooth orb resembling a mirror, or rather a white refulgent light, which indicated that she was the moon. So, this is a vision of Isis. So none of the headdresses or crowns that I found exactly match this description, as you might expect, though nearly all of them feature some form of orb, as you can see here. The most common representation of the orb, all these are Greek, but in Egypt, the universal orb associated with Isis looks like this, which is actually a solar disk rather than a lunar disk. That relates her to her husband Osiris, the spiritual principle behind the pair of them. Next, vipers rising up after the manner of furrows environed the crown on the right hand and on the left, and cerulean ears of corn were also extended from above. This headdress features both the vipers and the ears of corn, and is overall the closest to Apuleius's vision. The rest of this highly detailed description of Isis as she appears to Apuleius is the stuff of vision. I say vision, not fancy, because number one, Apuleius's description is very compelling. I believe that he had this vision because I believe such visions did and still do happen. So that takes us to the next. Nonetheless, we don't have to do this line by line. Yeah. So could we get a reader for the next, please?
Leah, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. Glittering stars were dispersed through the embroidered border of the robe, and through the whole of its surface, and the full moon, shining in the middle of the stars, breathed forth flaming fires. Nevertheless, a crown, wholly consisting of flowers and fruits of every kind, adhered with indivisible connection to the border of that conspicuous robe in all its undulating motions. What she carried in her hands also consisted of things of a very different nature. For her right hand, indeed, bore a brazen rattle, sistrum, through the narrow lamina of which bent like a belt. Certain rods passing produced a sharp triple sound through the vibrating motion of her arm. An oblong vessel in the shape of a boat depended from her left hand, on the handle of which, in that part in which it was conspicuous, an asp raised its erect head and largely swelling neck. And shoes, woven from the leaves of the victorious palm tree, covered her immortal feet. The green color alludes to the vegetation which covers the face of the earth, and therefore represents the robe of nature. The black represents death and corruption as being the way to a new life and generation. Except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. John 3:3. White, yellow, and red signify the three principal colors of the alchemical, hermetical, universal medicine after the blackness of its putrefaction is over.
Thank you, Tia. Okay, we'll start with Apuleius's description of the sistrum. The sistrum, quote, for her right hand indeed bore a brazen rattle, sistrum, through the narrow lamina of which bent like a belt, certain rods passing produced a sharp triple sound through the vibrating motion of her arm. So the lamina or lamina is the thin plate through which the rods are inserted. The triple sound, which is new information from last time, we looked at this sistrum for a little bit. The triple sound suggests that though percussive, like a rattle, the small rings were tuned to give three distinct sounds. Next, an oblong vessel in the shape of a boat depended from her left hand, on the handle of which, in that part in which it was conspicuous, an asp raised its erect head and largely swelling neck. So we see this unusual vessel in the brass sculpture on the left here. The asp was a sign of royalty, but in the hand of Isis, it signifies the emergence of the potency of life as well as the surety of death. In other words, the entire cycle. Albert Pike gives us more insight on this. Could we get a reader for this?
Scott, can you read that for us, please?
The seventh letter of the Egyptian alphabet, called Zuta or life, was sacred to Thoth and was expressed by a serpent standing on its tail. And that deity, the god of healing, like Asclepios, thank you, to whom the serpent was consecrated, leans on a knotted stick around which coils a snake. The Isaiah tablet, describing the mysteries of Isis, is charged with serpents in every part as her emblems. The asp was especially dedicated to her and is seen on the heads of her statues, on the bonnets of her priests, and on the tiaras of the kings of Egypt. Serapis was sometimes represented with a human head and serpentine tail. And in one engraving, two minor gods are represented with him, one by a serpent with a bull's head, the other by a serpent with the radiated head of a lion.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, I mean, we could spend 15 minutes just talking about this. You see these symbols come up over and over, and the more you study them and their meaning, you more quickly come to an awareness of what is being emphasized by a particular statue, right? For instance, this little statue on the right, which is Isis as a serpent, is emphasizing her wisdom aspect, right? And I think the ancients had no problem with it, depicting their very much revered gods in these different guises, quite different than what we do in our quote unquote more advanced times. Yes, Tia. Sorry, PL. I just saw it go up.
Sorry, I just had a quick question, Francis. I came in a little late. Do we know, and did you say anything about Apuleius? Do we know anything about his unfoldment? Because I think it's really interesting how he described the nature of his vision and the descriptors that he uses.
Yeah, let's see. I didn't go into it for this presentation. I read about it. He came up once before when we were in a previous webinar, and we got into who he was a little bit more. He was Greek, but I can't really tell you details of that. The book he wrote, The Metamorphosis, is one of the great books of the ancient world. But sorry, you have to do a Google search on him. I don't have that
Okay,
at hand.
because it would be interesting, like
Would
what
be.
initiation group or he might have belonged to, what group.
Yeah, well, I would imagine not much is known about his personal life, given how ancient he is. But maybe why don't you do a quick search and you can come and tell us something if you feel like it.
I didn't come up with anything. That's why I'm asking.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, yeah.
Francis,
Yeah.
sorry, I wanted to tell you that Aunt Veronica says Asclepius, and I know I'm saying that wrong, but he's the god of medicine.
Yeah, that's right. He was associated with medicine. I do remember that. Is
it
I
the
don't.
god of medicine
Yeah,
or the father of medicine?
yeah, I think more likely the latter, because he's the one that had a vision of Isis, and he wrote this book, right? So I think it would be more the father, and I'm getting a memory of that. Sorry, guys, I don't know.
No, I think they're two different people. That was the guy, and I can't say his name. This is Asclepius. Oh, there you go, up there. The god of healing, like Asclepius, to whom the serpent. So there it is. It's up there.
Aesculapius. Yeah. God of healing. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. If somebody wants to do a search, see what they can come up with Apuleius, that'd be great. This is supposed to be group work here, guys. More dialogue, the better. So you might look into that and insert yourself when you find out. Okay. And let's see here. Finally, we have MPH's accurate assessment of the colors that appeared in Apuleius's vision. Green for vegetal life, the third ray, which governs the form aspect, and the traditional color associated with the heart center, which Isis personifies, black for death, but also for the unseen realms from which Isis emerges, and finally the white, yellow, and red of the Hermetic arts. Okay, next up.
I found
Yeah,
him in Wikipedia.
yeah. What did they say?
He was a Numidian Latin language prose writer, Platonist philosopher, and he was born in Rome. He studied Plato in Athens, traveled all around, was intimate in several cults of the mysteries. He did go to Italy, Asia Minor, and Egypt. Most famous incident in his life was when he was accused of using magic to gain the attentions and fortunes of a wealthy widow. And his most famous work is Metamorphosis,
Yeah.
otherwise known as the Golden Ass.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
more information in there, but
That's good. That gets us in the ballpark. Yeah. And was he around? Does it give years there in the beginning of that article?
yes, yes. 124
Mhm.
to after 170. So
Okay, so that's Neoplatonist times. Yeah. Right. Probably an initiate of some degree, who was afforded this amazing vision. Yeah. Thank you.
and Magda says his symbol with the two serpents crossing the rod a few times has become the symbol of medicine.
Right. The caduceus. Indeed.
Right.
Oh, so he created that symbol. Is that what she's saying? He used that symbol.
Well, as Asclepius did, is my
Oh, right.
understanding. He
Okay.
was not Apuleius.
Now, okay. Yeah, that makes more sense. Yeah. What is it again? Esculapius or Esculapius. That's how I see it. Okay. All right. Thanks for that, BL. It's always useful. It'd be more convenient if I knew everything about all things, but unfortunately, that's not the case.
Oh, come on. When you said you were going to start this, you said you knew everything about everything.
Did I? Well, that sounds like something I'd say. Okay, can we get a reader, please?
Yes. Vivian, can you read that, please?
The ancients gave the name Isis to one of their occult medicines. Therefore, the description here given relates somewhat to chemistry. A black drape also signifies that the moon, or the lunar humidity, the Sophic universal mercury, and the operating substance of nature in alchemical terminology, has no light of its own, but receives its light, its fire, and its vitalizing force from the sun. Isis was the image or representative of the great works of the wise men, the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, and the universal medicine. Other hieroglyphics seen in connection with Isis are no less curious than those already described, but it is impossible to enumerate all, for many symbols were used interchangeably by the Egyptian hermeticists. The goddess often wore upon her head a hat made of cypress branches to signify mourning for her dead husband, and also for the physical death which she caused every creature to undergo in order to receive a new life in posterity or a periodic resurrection. The head of Isis is sometimes ornamented with a crown of gold or a garland of olive leaves, as conspicuous marks of her sovereignty as queen of the world and mistress of the entire universe. The crown of gold signifies also the aurific unctuosity or sulphurous fatness of the solar and vital fires, which she dispenses to every individual by a continual circulation of the elements. This circulation being symbolized by the musical rattle which she carries in her hand. This sistrum is also the Ionic symbol of purity.
Thank you, Vivienne. Okay, first, the ancients gave the name Isis to one of their occult medicines. Therefore, the description here given relates somewhat to chemistry. I did a deep dive trying to find that association, just like what specific medicine was given the name Isis. I couldn't find it. But I did get some information from this, a monthly newsletter from August 1st, 1935. Could we get a reader?
Yes. Mary, can you read that for us, please? Well, I don't see her unmuting. But there we
She
go.
came up.
Okay, hold on. Hold on just one second. I also wanted to say, Marguerite says, the rod with a single serpent coiling around it is the symbol of today's World Health Organization.
It's been modified. Yeah, it's made more exoteric, right? Of just having
Okay,
this.
Mary.
Yeah, okay, Mary.
Mary, please go ahead.
The first practical laboratory was that part of the temple set aside for research in chemistry and medicine. The various branches of research in the chemical factors of life were not originally divided into numerous departments as now. Priests were the first scientists, the first physicians, and the first students of anatomy and physiology. Man's exploration of nature and its process give rise to the theory of what we call now science. But in older times, these researches were not carried on by scoffing materialists, but by enlightened philosophers who discovered beneath the superficial aspects of form divine, chemical and mechanical processes. Science is therefore the study of the anatomy of the body of God. The laboratory reveals not only the infinite mystery of life, but also the infinite complexity of function.
Thank you. So we can get some idea of the cyclicity of how these disciplines are approached. You know, it's promised that in the new age we'll return back to an understanding of physical science being an effect of science on the higher realms or occult science. And here we see that when science was reintroduced in this fifth root race, that was the point of view of that time. Okay. Next, her black drape also signifies that the moon, or the lunar humidity, the Sophic universal mercury, and the operating substance of nature in alchemical terminology, has no light of its own, but receives its light, its fire, and its vitalizing force from the sun, which of course would be represented by Osiris. Sophic means relating to wisdom. This passage describes the alchemical Mercury as an aspect of Isis. HPB gives us more insight. Could we get a reader, please?
Yes. Rudy, can you read that for us, please?
Hear me?
Yes.
Yes, please. You're real low.
In alchemy, mercury is the radical moist, primitive or elementary water, containing the seed of the universe, fecundated by the solar fires. To express this fecundating principle, a phallus was often added to the cross, the male and the female, or the vertical and the horizontal united by the Egyptians. The cruciform termini also represents this dual idea which was found in Egypt in the cubic Hermes.
Okay,
Dr.
thank you. Any questions about this? It's a really good esoteric description of this concept. Okay, next up, Isis was the image or representative of the great works of the wise men, the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, and the universal medicine. So Isis is not the source of this wisdom, but rather the higher intelligence which makes the source available to humankind. This passage from Thrice Greatest Hermes gives us more insight. Could we get a reader?
And Veronica, can you read that for us, please?
It is true that Isis is the instrument or organ of conveying the hidden wisdom to Horus, and that it is eventually Hermes or the Logos who is the true light itself, which shines through her, the pupil of Egypt's eye, out of that mysterious darkness in which she found herself when she received illumination at the hands of Camephis. Isis then is the apple or pupil of the eye of Osiris. On earth, the mysterious black is Egypt herself, the wisdom land. Isis is the mysterious wisdom of Egypt, but in our treatise, she is even more than this, for she is that wisdom, but now truly illumined by the direct sight, the new dawn of the Trismegistus discipline of which she speaks, thrice greatest Hermes.
Thank you. So, suggests that she penetrated into the intuition, which is the direct knowing, and which then illumines higher mind to become the teachings among the human family. Okay, so I just only knew this as a result of this reading, that she represents the pupil. Don't you love that? The pupil of Egypt's eye. She is the seer, literally. And in that seeing is the direct knowledge comes. So the apple or pupil of the eye of Osiris, which is Egypt's eye. Interesting. Okay. Next, the goddess often wore upon her head a hat made of cypress branches to signify mourning for her dead husband, and also for the physical death which she caused every creature to undergo in order to receive a new life in posterity or a periodic resurrection. Let's take hands before we get into this.
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Was that me?
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah, I see your hand up.
It's true, but I missed the name. Can you go back to the previous slide?
Sure. I tell you, the same trying to me nuts. There we go.
So you and I have seen this chart in different forms for a long time. Do you remember where it came from? Is it from Schwaller de Lubitz, or where? I've never liked it. It just seemed faked to me, but I wonder where it came from.
Oh, I couldn't tell you offhand, Scott. It's sort of the accepted version, but no, I don't know. See, the text is really what matters, not the.
Well, but they always associate it with that.
That's right. They're
Sure.
one and the same. No, I don't have that at my fingertips. Just where that came from. Yeah. So you don't buy it, huh?
Not at all.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me in looking at it and assessing it, that it's odd that, for instance, this long tail would represent 1/32. It seemed the assignations of the fractions seem somewhat random.
At best.
So it'd be interesting to, see or hear somebody's interpretation and as to why these fractions were assigned these parts of the eye, and if that's convincing or not, and if it actually has ancient source. That's the first question, isn't it? Or did somebody just like the idea?
I think it's the latter, but I'm not sure. Anyway, I was wondering why.
Okay, no, don't know.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, onward. Thank you.
Francis?
Yeah.
Magda says, what is the cubic Hermes? She says, I imagine having to do with the Metatron, alias the foundation stone, elixir, etc. Alias all the cubic nuclear information of utmost importance that we discussed yesterday with Dwayne Carpenter.
Yeah, well, a cube is just a cross is an unfolded cube, right? So they represent the same thing. The cube stone, the fourfold one, which interestingly is the emperor in the Tarot, is associated with this Mercury aspect. Interesting that Mercury is a fourth ray planet, but it represents the, as the quote, radical moist or the primitive elementary water. It suggests that manifest aspect, right? Which needs and of course the phallus it's really the seed of manifestation, and that's what the phallus represents, and that's what the cube represents in the world of the sacred geometrical forms, right? The cube is, DK calls it the imprisoning cube or the imprisoning square. They mean somewhat the same thing, right? Which it's the symbol of the material world. But as Mercury, it's relates that cubic aspect to spirit, right? It's the fecundating principle, not just the dead form. It's what is it, just like as the messenger of the gods, as that translating entity, it represents that which links spirit to form, but in and of itself doesn't carry the light of spirit. That's about as good as I can do with that.
Okay, we have another hand, but she also went on to say plasma. That's what we were talking about yesterday was all of that nuclear information and plasma and stuff. So she added that to her comment.
Okay, thank you.
And then Anne Veronica's got her hand up.
Yes?
Okay, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Can we go back to the previous image? The one Scott was talking about, I think Scott was talking about.
Sure.
With the eye.
Oh, I think it's after this, actually. It's here. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I think you have said it in some of the webinars that this image here actually represents the inside of the brain. I can't remember if it's the pituitary body or the pineal gland. And I was wondering, maybe it's a very crude map of the functions of the brain.
Well, let's see. With the eye, you can see that as the, the third eye, which is the idea that it's connected to the pineal that is at the center of the head, though that's also connected to the head center. But she's very particularly would be connected through the vision aspect and the third sense to the Ajna Center, of course. But yeah, I don't know whether, that's the case. It seems like a possible way of looking. It just needs more research to see if this has any validity at all. First of all, the first thing would be to find out where this came from. And I just don't have that info. I just grabbed it because of the idea that Isis is the pupil of Egypt's eye. And that's why I pulled up this illustration, not to make a case for this, right? And, if you take away the whole fractions idea and, he just collapses down to the eye without this supposed meaning, then it holds that, Isis through the eye becomes the receptor of the divine vision, right? She's not the source, but is the receiver of that. And that's very much indicative of the Osiris-Isis connection. So, yeah, I just don't know in terms of the connection with the points in the brain, it may be.
Yes, I was wondering, actually, I would like to research about it very much because the ancient Egyptians seem to know some things which were quite advanced. And I was wondering because I don't know if you gave it to us, Francis, on a webinar, if I've seen it somewhere. This image, this eye, it has to do with the inside of the brain. And of course, it has to do with Isis being the eye of Egypt and the Ajna and the pineal gland and all those things. But it's also an image of the inside of the brain if you cut it.
Well,
So
interesting idea.
It's
all about proportions, isn't it? All that's happening here is equally divided proportions, starting with the highest proportion, curiously not being half, but a quarter, and then just further dividing it to an eighth. Oh, no, here's the half. It does start with a half. Randomly, stuck off to this point, seemingly randomly.
But it says it represents smell. The other one represents sight. The other one, the 1/16th, represents hearing.
Right. Yes.
It has all to do with the functions of the brain.
Yes. Or the
it's
senses.
just a thought, nothing more.
Yeah. And what I'm noticing now is that you have a clockwise motion through the fractions, that it goes half to quarter to eighth to 16th to 32nd to 64th. You might even, you can't quite say it's a spiral, but it does unfold in that way. And that might have been why they were assigned in that way, just, but I'd have to agree with Scott that it's, in terms of the parts of the eye that we're actually looking at here, that it seems random, but, just we suffer from a lack of information here.
Okay, just a thought, Francis.
Yeah, and it may well be connected. Okay,
And then Joe says on the eye, the information on the right doesn't reflect what DK tells us about hearing, seeing, and touch.
Okay. It doesn't. I'm trying to see why that would be. Well, I don't see. Well, he brings in terms of the order, that's certainly true, right? Because the unfoldment of the order in DK's teaching is hearing, touch, sight. What is it then? Taste and smell. I think that's the way they unfold, and that's not the order that's presented here, but it would just take a deeper dive, and it would be a really interesting study to see if there's any validity to this idea. Yeah, Scott.
Perhaps you mentioned this, I missed it. This is the left eye of Heru, which is associated with the moon. The right eye is the opposite.
Associated with Ra, the sun. Yeah. Yeah. And that would be the eye of Isis. The left eye would be the eye of Isis.
Which is why it's depicted here.
Indeed. Well, it's also why I found this version, because you can find other, the internet is not all that occult. So you have to kind of try to find what the particular expression you're looking for. And so I went for this left eye because of that,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay, Joe added, I'm correlating with the aspects with smell and taste relating to the rays of attribute.
Okay. We're going to leave it at that, though, because I'm just working kind of with so little information here. But it would be a really interesting, this has happened to me before, I should know better by now, that, when you throw up an illustration like this, you're asking for comments, right? The reason I used it was to illustrate this eye, for the text. But, it's such a fascinating chart that, it bears further exploration. Okay, next up. The goddess often wore upon her head. I already said that. So I'll reread it though, so we'll know what we're talking about here. The goddess often wore upon her head a hat made of cypress branches to signify mourning for her dead husband and also for the physical death which she caused every creature to undergo in order to receive a new life in posterity or a periodic resurrection. So you have an exoteric and esoteric understanding of the meaning of cypress here mixed in one sentence. The traditional understanding of the cypress branch would be the mourning for Osiris, right? But then NPH took a little deeper dive in recognition of the fact that she causes every creature. By the way, that's my dog just kicking the door in his sleep, if you're wondering. She causes every creature to undergo death in order that they may come into a more appropriate form in their new life. What overshadows is the goddess of the entire cyclic process, not just the birth and life aspect, right? So cypress is an evergreen, thus representing eternal life. Periodic life represents both the yearly cycle and the cycle of incarnations, not just the vegetal cycle, but also the cycle of incarnations, which in both cases Isis governs. Osiris represents solar vitality. Thus, we have the cyclic withdrawing of his life-giving energy. In fact, his death was mourned at the time of the fall equinox. Could we get a reader for this, please?
Yes. Janet, can you read that for us, please?
Okay, let's see. For the fabled shutting up of Osiris into the coffin is perhaps nothing but a riddle of occultation and the disappearance of water. Wherefore they say that Osiris disappeared in the month of Athur, when the annuals ceasingly entirely the Nile sinks and the land is denuded, and night lengthened, darkness increases, and the power of the light wanes and is mastered. and the priests performed melancholy rites, including covering a cow made entirely of gold with a black coat of fine linen as a mask of mourning for the goddess. For they look on the cow as an image of Isis, which they exhibit for 4 days from the 17th consequently.
1 second.
The things mourned are first, the Nile falling and sinking; second, the northern winds being completely extinguished by the southern gaining the mastery; third, the day becoming less than the night; and finally, the denudation of the earth, together with the stripping of the trees which shed their leaves at that time.
Thank you. Okay, so, it makes sense that the equinox would be that point, where darkness overtakes light in that cycle that moves us to the winter solstice. Okay, next up, the head of Isis is sometimes ornamented with a crown of gold or a garland of olive leaves as conspicuous marks of her sovereignty as queen of the world and mistress of the entire universe. Those two being pretty much the same thing, right? Just where do you extend her reign? If you're looking at universal Mula Prakriti, which is the absolute source of the substantive realm, then that's both universal and true within the solar system, and she's the goddess of that. Okay, the crown of gold relates Isis to the solar principle and thus to her husband Osiris, whereas olive leaves link her to the cycles of the natural world. Since Osiris represents the solar vitality that makes it possible for the natural world to exist, to come into being, their pairing is one of cause and effect. Finally, the crown of gold signifies the aurific unctuosity or sulfurous fatness of the solar and vital fires, which she dispenses to every individual by a continual circulation of the elements. This circulation being symbolized by the musical rattle which she carries in her hand. The sistrum is also the Ionic symbol of purity. Quite a mouthful. Aurific means the ability to transform base substances into gold. Aurific unctuosity, or sulfurous fatness, literally refers to certain metals that have a greasy or soapy feel, but here means that Isis continuously exudes and circulates both the life-giving and transformative qualities by means of the elements of ether, air, fire, water, and earth, and their derivatives, such as the alchemical mercury and sulfur. Esoterically, this includes all forms of matter, gross and subtle, that make up the cosmic physical plane over which she rules. The sistrum, or sistrum, we looked at this in our last webinar together. It's both the symbolic of the means by which Isis circulates the elements and of quote unquote Ionic purity, a reference to Isis as the Virgin Mother. In this context, the Yoni-shaped holder represents the boundaries of the realm of substance, or Mula Prakriti. Any thoughts or questions? Keep them coming, guys.
Yeah, yes. Vivian says, I do like the idea that it is Isis who causes death in order to enable new life, not the Grim Reaper or our modern minds.
Yes, it's such a more enlightened understanding of Godhead, that the ancients had, even in Greece, which was very exoteric compared to the Egyptian which we just have the barest understanding of what was really going on in those temples, what was really being understood by the acolytes of those temples. There would have been an incredibly profound philosophy. But we do have decay, don't we? So that helps to make up for it. Thanks.
And then Joe says 4 bars and 3 bars, suggesting the number didn't matter so much.
I don't know if it suggests that, because we did look at a statement that said that there was a threefold tone sounded, which would happen through these. It almost suggests that these discs were tuned in some way, that they emanated 3 different sounds. This could be from an entirely different period. We just, I don't know. Looking at these, an archaeologist could tell you which periods were which, or it could have a different meaning used in different circumstances. I would very much doubt that it means that it didn't matter. I think it would be specific purposes or a different era where something else was emphasized, right? Okay, the main thing to hold on to is the idea. It's such a deep concept that the shaking of the sistrum actually kept the circulation of the elements in motion, right? So you didn't have this tamasic state result, that it kept him rajasic, kept him in circulation and moving, and therefore vivified, right? It's really it's quite a concept.
Janet asks, has anyone heard their sound?
Oh, I'm sure. These, like for instance, all you have to do is shake this. It exists. It's in a museum. So I'm sure that you could probably even find a recording of it on YouTube. Just Google sound of a sistrum, and you might be able to find that. I didn't do that. It would be interesting. I will do that, in fact. Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Okay.
No, that's it for now.
Okay, next up, can we get a reader, please?
Yes. Magda, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. A serpent interwoven among the olive leaves on her head, devouring its own tail, denotes that the horrific unctuosity was soiled with the venom of terrestrial corruption which surrounded it, and must be mortified and purified by 7 planetary circulations or purifications called flying eagles, alchemical terminology, in order to make it medicinal for the restoration of health. Here, the emanations from the sun are recognized as a medicine for the healing of human ills. The 7 planetary circulations are represented by the circumambulations of the Masonic Lodge, by the marching of the Jewish priests 7 times around the walls of Jericho, and of the Mohammedan priests 7 times around the Kaaba at Mecca. From the Crown of Gold project, 3 horns of plenty, signifying the abundance of the gifts of nature, proceeding from one root, having its origin in the heavens, head of Isis.
Thank you. Okay, so first, a serpent interwoven among the olive leaves on her head, devouring its own tail. Olive leaves were universally recognized in ancient times as a symbol of resurrection and immortality. Only later did the olive branch come to mean peace and victory, especially in Greece. The serpent devouring its own tail, or Ouroboros, represents the eternal cycle of destruction and rebirth. The Ouroboros and olive branch together represent the gradual triumph of the life aspect through cyclic manifestation. But MPH ascribes a different meaning to these two elements. Quote, a serpent interwoven among the among the olive leaves on her head, devouring its own tail, denotes that the aurific, that's gold bearing, aurific unctuosity was soiled with the venom of terrestrial corruption which surrounded it. It's an interesting interpretation. So the AUR in aurific comes from the Latin aurum, meaning gold. Thus, as mentioned before, aurific unctuosity means gold producing, or more specifically, in alchemical terms, the capacity to transform base metal into gold. Nonetheless, what MPH states here is true. In esoteric healing, DK talks about the taint inherent in matter that we've inherited from the previous solar system, which MPH calls in the text terrestrial corruption. Can we get a reader for this?
Yes, Joe, can you read that for us, please?
I like Medusa. It should therefore be borne in mind that the physical bodies in which humanity now dwells are constructed of very ancient matter, and that the substance employed is tainted or conditioned by the history of the past. To this concept must be added two others. First, that incoming souls draw to themselves the type of material with which they must construct their outer sheaths, and that this will be responsive to some aspect of their subtler natures. If, for instance, physical desire conditions them, the material of their physical vehicle will be largely responsive to that particular urge. Secondly, each physical body carries within itself the seeds of inevitable retribution if its functions are misused.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, any questions about this? So you can see the connection, that how MPH could interpret this combination of symbols, the olive leaves and the Ouroboros, as a indication of terrestrial corruption, because these cycles, the cyclic motion is the motion of matter. So you could see that cyclic motion indicated by the Ouroboros as an indication of that cyclic material corruption. I think Ouroboros also has a higher meaning as well. Okay, so we'll pick up mid-sentence here. Terrestrial corruption must be mortified and purified by 7 planetary circulations or purifications called flying eagles, alchemical terminology, in order to make it medicinal for the restoration of health. Okay, we've been introduced to alchemical symbolism in previous chapters. But here and in what follows, MPH is moving us quite a bit deeper into the subject. So in alchemy, the 7 planetary circulations are a specific series of what they call operations that involve the distillation and circulation of 7 metals, which are associated with the 7 classical planets, as shown here. The pairings are silver and the moon, Mercury and Mercury, copper and Venus, gold and the sun, iron and Mars, tin and Jupiter, and lead to Saturn. The aim of the quote-unquote 7 planetary circulations is to purify and perfect each metal until it attains the qualities of gold, considered to be the most perfect metal. Alchemists believe that gold represents the perfection of matter and spirit, and that by metaphorically transforming the other metals into gold, they can achieve spiritual enlightenment and immortality. Though in alchemy, the 7 planetary circulations are an actual laboratory process, they are primarily and more importantly metaphors for spiritual processes, since obviously the mere manipulation of substances is not going to bring enlightenment. My guess is that they paired the two, that the outer became a discipline and the effect or the outer demonstration of an inner process. This is also true of the processes of the 7 planetary circulations, which involves heating, melting, dissolving, sublimating, coagulating, and crystallizing each metal in a sealed glass vessel called an alembic. Alchemists also add various substances such as salt, sulfur, antimony or antimony, arsenic, and aquavita to aid the transformation. They then observe changes in color, texture, smell, and taste of the metals as they undergo the quote-unquote circulations. That's the physical aspect. Each process is also specifically related to one of the planet/metal combinations. For example, the planetary circulation of the moon involving the element silver corresponds to the distillation stage of alchemy, which involves purification by heating and condensing the metal repeatedly until it becomes a clear and potent liquid. So, we're not talking about silver as it appears on the periodic chart anymore. We're talking about a very esoteric process here through this process of distillation. And what's described here exactly corresponds to the function of the moon veiling Vulcan as the esoteric ruler of Virgo. As Vulcan purifies and raises the vibration of the substance involved through heat and pressure. All that can be related to Vulcan, veiled by the moon, meaning applied to the form aspect. So you do have correlations. Alchemists also take into account the position in the heavens and influence of the planets to determine when to perform the circulations, since they believed that each planet had a specific energy and quality that could affect the metal associated with it. For example, they perform the circulations of iron during the days and hours that are connected with the planet Mars. But as before mentioned, for esotericists, the physical process of the 7 planetary circulations were symbolic of specific spiritual processes, which serve to awaken certain hidden potentials within themselves. Okay, I'll restate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. We have a couple of comments. Can you go back to the 7-pointed star? Okay. Joe says, note the 7-pointed star here. And then I also wanted to point out that the symbols for the elements, you normally consider astrologically fire and air to be opposite. And here it's air and water that are opposite, and fire and earth that are opposite. So I thought that was interesting.
Isn't it?
Um,
Right. Well, actually, primordially, it is fire and water. It's only when you bring in the other elements that that shifts. Even in alchemy, that's true. And of course, these are not the symbols for these metals. This is just to show the connection to the planets. These are the planetary symbols, right? So
right.
that is associated with Saturn, etc. Right? And you see the same thing here.
Right. Right. And then,
Yeah.
oh, sorry.
Right.
And then Magda says the 7 purifications, the 7 planetary circulations, and the 7 demons of the Magdalene, could they be the same concept?
The 7 demons of the what?
Magdalene,
I don't know about that.
Mary Magdalene.
Well,
I've never heard it
off at the
in
top of my head,
relation to the 7 demons, but
yeah, that could be what's being cast out. He cast out 7 demons. That could be a connection with with an alchemical process, but I'm just guessing at that. Certainly, the impurities could be allegorized or personified, as demons. I see Tia's hand.
yeah. Go ahead, Tia.
It's interesting though that they work with 7 planetary circulations
Hmm.
when they were doing their work. I think that's really interesting, with the 7 aspects. And then the fact that they're all planets that are closer, or bodies that are closer to the sun or earth, as opposed to the outlying planets. We don't see any correlations to other substances with those.
Well, we do have Jupiter and Saturn here.
No, I'm talking about, but those are still, you don't see Uranus and Neptune or Pluto.
Oh, no, that's right. Yeah, because this is an ancient science, and those planets were only known to high initiates in those days. Yeah, and it could be that in the inner sanctum of alchemy that those planets were known even then. But
Okay.
any published information about alchemy is not going to include those. I don't know if anybody's tried to update the alchemical, what would you say, body of work to include those outer planets. It'd be interesting. Certainly they would have some associations with metals, but that's not given in the usual treatises.
Well, because it would be interesting if they were trying to create gold. Maybe that might have been some useful information.
Okay, we have a couple of comments reference that. Janet says, and the 9th symbols circling between the Neptune figure with the 3 bars. What are they? They look like Neptune and they have the 3 bars on them on the outer wheel.
Yeah, I see them. I don't know. Sorry. It's another example of, how I use this symbol just to give an indication, further indication of these planet metal connections, but I didn't do a deep dive into all the symbolism. I don't know whether this is, let's look. There was a chart here that, wait a minute, maybe it's afterwards. Yeah. So we have, no, nothing here.
We have tin and lead and silver and
Yeah,
and gold.
It's not going to be a specific metal. It would be a concept, and it could just be an artistic design. I don't know. I would think it would have some meaning, but I just don't know.
Okay, and then Mary says there's a great chapter in Dynamics of the Unconscious by Liz Green and Sasporit, can't say his name, Howard, where she talks about the alchemical process and psychological astrology. The last chapter, alchemical symbols in the horoscope.
Oh, cool.
Liz Green includes the transpersonal planets in the alchemical discussion. So
Wow.
that answers that question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Howard Sasportas, I think
Okay.
is how his
Oh, yeah,
name.
I remember reading about him.
Yeah, he did a lot of work. He did a lot of work with Liz Green. So
Yeah.
um,
And she's, for those of you who don't know her, she's a wonderful astrologer, and she has a very compelling writing style. So, if you're so moved, what's the name of the book again? I probably have it.
yeah, you and me both. Dynamics of the Unconsciousness,
Okay.
or of the Unconscious.
Well,
Dynamics of the Unconscious.
I'll look that up. That would be really interesting to see what she says about that. She's one of those you can trust, one of those astrologers that at least I trust. Okay, where in the world were we? We got to here, we got to there. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Okay,
We may
so
have made it this far.
yeah, I think we did. So, what?
One more comment. Vivian says Isaac Newton was an alchemist,
Yes.
risked his life due to the work. I understand that some of his unpublished work has been brought to light.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Yeah, he wrote quite a treatise on alchemy, so that he really does lend a very revered name to the discipline. That's for sure. Yeah, thanks, Vivian. Okay, I'll restate MPH's passage just to get us up to date here. Terrestrial corruption must be mortified and purified by 7 planetary circulations or purifications called flying eagles, alchemical terminology, in order to make it medicinal for the restoration of health. We are now deep into alchemy here in our chapter on Isis. So, flying eagles in alchemy are symbols of the sublimation process, which involves the purification and elevation of a substance from a solid to a gaseous state. The eagle represents the volatile or airy principle, while the lion, not mentioned here, but nonetheless, represents the fixed or earthy principle. Interesting. Again, you have that thing, BL, where it tends to represent fire in astrology and in theosophy, but here it represents the fixed or earthy principle. That's why it's depicted trying to eat the sun. It's trying to neutralize the influence of the sun as fixed earth, which would be, of course, we're looking at Taurus here. Alchemists often used mercury as the substance to be sublimated, right? So the flying eagles represent the sublimation process, and it was the active ingredient for that process was mercury, right? No, the substance to be sublimated was mercury, and they sometimes called it, quote, the eagle of Mercury. This sublimation process was seen as a metaphor for spiritual development. Thus, flying eagles also symbolize the separation of the subtle from the gross, or the essence from matter. Alchemists sometimes depicted 2 eagles flying in opposite directions, one ascending and one descending. I couldn't find an illustration for that, to illustrate the dynamic balance between the spiritual and the material. Any thoughts or questions? I know that.
I think it's interesting that the hierarchical ruler of Scorpio is Mercury.
Yes.
And Leo in the sun, and DK says a couple of times that Mercury and the sun are interchangeable.
Right. That the
So
sun.
there's, in all of this old stuff, there is esoteric things that still hold today that we're just learning about today that have been around for a
Forever.
really long time, because my understanding of the Atlantean times is they didn't have a mind, but the hierarchy impressed them with a lot of stuff that became the mysteries.
It's a fascinating thing to think about. You know, how could you be impressed with the mysteries without mind? Well, that's because they just worked from a completely different place in that fourth root race. It is hard for us to even imagine it, you know, what that would be. But remember, this was the reason this is appearing now is because alchemy was one of the gifts given by Hermes Trismegistus, who you could say, well, Hermes, at least in the Godhead sense, was the source of Isis's illumined information. So that's why this is appearing in this chapter. I see Scott's hand.
Go ahead, Scott.
This appears to be, the picture you have now appears to be upside down. Is that true?
Let me see. Hang on. First of all, we'll make it really big to see the print. This was the way it appeared. Yeah. This is the way it appeared in my search results, but you are absolutely right. I was just testing you guys, you know. Okay, let me flip this guy. Flipping it this way? Yeah. Does that work?
Oh, yeah. Then you've got the sun and the earth and the talons of the flying monkey. Oh, wait a minute.
Hang on a minute. I'll pull it in. Hang on.
And I think maybe it needs to be flipped right to left as well.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, that's just the first part of the flip. What I should have done is just rotated it instead of flipped it, but this works too. That gets us right, doesn't it? Okay, now let me go back to play in window. Is that right? Looks right.
Yeah, the script can be almost read now. Yeah, can be the serpent of.
Well, you know what I can do? You can, sorry. Okay, let me get out of here once more. I tell you, come on. Yeah, so I bring this over here.
And while you're playing with that, Aunt Veronica says that after the fifth initiation, Mercury retreats into the sun.
Right, sure. In other words, the influence that Mercury has represented all the way up to and through the fourth initiation is no longer needed, and it's sublimated by the solar energies. I don't know if that's readable yet, even. Let me just pull up one of these, and we might not have a good enough a resolution that you can read this. Let me see. We'll just pull this up. No, it's not going to work. It's too blurry. Even if I...
Magda says maybe it's upside down because both the eagle and the lion are interchangeable, meaning they both can play density and or solar pure energy.
Well, that's an interesting thought, but I think it was just posted wrong, and I didn't, I didn't see the obvious fact that it was upside down. There is that idea of the reflected image into the lower worlds, so you could see this as a higher reality and then do a reflected image of this. Yeah, unfortunately, the resolution isn't good enough. Sometimes you can do a search for a higher resolution. We're not going to make that effort right now. It would be interesting to read, though, wouldn't it? Okay, there we are. Thank you, Scott, for that. I always depend on you.
Say, by the way, looking through my books, the Schwaller Lubitz books, and those who wrote as his students, as it were, like John Hensley West and Lucy Lamy, they use this eye that.
Oh, you
use it.
mean the Egyptian eye?
Well, but I think it does come from Schwaller Lubitz. I don't think it comes from further back. And John Anthony West actually uses the right eye. And points out that if you add up the fractions, you get 63/64ths. And showing that dealing with fractions like that, you'll never get unity. You'll never get one.
Right. Yeah.
But this, just one last thing. If you look at that eye and the pieces of it, the underside of the eye is not fraction.
Oh, geez. It's not what?
It's not part of the fractions.
I gotta find it first.
Way back where?
Way back.
48.
48. All right, hang on. Let me see where I am now. Come on, where am I now? Okay, I'm at 71, and this is at
48.
8. Okay, yeah.
The underside of the eye is not fraction. It's taken up as parts of the
Underside.
the
So-
underside. It's interesting.
Instead of being one whole idea.
The eyebrow.
Well, I agree with you that it seems arbitrary, but I also really, I do respect the works of Schwaller de Lubitsch. He came up with some amazing ideas and amazing discoveries. Wasn't just a philosopher, he really was a philosopher archaeologist.
For sure.
So it really does bear further examination, just because,
Or maybe not.
even if it did come from him. Well, yeah, I think before one discards it, one
Yeah.
should look at his writings on the subject.
They point out that the Egyptians used diminution. So they took the first fraction of 1/2 and cut it in half through each one of these as it rotates around the eye.
There you have it. Yeah, half to quarter to
So, but
8 16th. Yeah, there it is.
I don't know.
But
Anyway,
it's true.
for that, I suppose.
Yeah. Those that Foster Bailey used to say, interesting if true.
It's a good way to put it.
Okay, here we are.
And Veronica says the 164th is missing, I guess, from the divine that isn't in form.
164th.
It was there in the image.
Yeah. But it's missing what?
Represented by touch
Oh,
is missing. I guess the divine that isn't in form. It's there. And
Yeah.
Veronica, you want to explain? She says, no, I added them all up.
Yeah, that's where you get the 63, 64, showing that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. That's the key.
that's the key. And if this does have a philosophical basis, that's part of it, which is that. And if you translate it to the senses, you could say that, all the senses, even when fully realized, still do not add up to the unitive or synthetic sense, the unitive sense, which is, it's the same idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Okay, let's see, get back here. Let me get back to 71. And now play again. it's great with you guys. I can just mess around. I don't have to be all formal about this. But well, this this becomes a much more interesting symbol, doesn't it? With the dragon standing on the Tao. Of course, the Tao is reversed, interestingly, but you have the, yeah, this is fascinating. I should make the effort to explore the illustrations that I put up more thoroughly, because they invariably evoke more interest. But this is a very cool dragon, if nothing else. Okay, where in the world are we? We're talking about flying eagles. Yeah, we here with the flying eagles. Flying eagles also symbolize the separation of the subtle from the gross. We read that. So next up, here the emanations from the sun are recognized as a medicine for the healing of human ills. Alchemists created solar elixirs, which were potions or tinctures made from plants or minerals that were exposed to the sun's rays. These elixirs were believed to have healing and rejuvenating properties. But on a deeper level, alchemists seek to harmonize the inner and outer sun, right? We would talk about the source of the sun, right? As in unveiled to us the face of the true spiritual sun, right? The inner and outer sun, the soul with the personality or whatever, which is the true meaning behind the idea of transforming base metal into gold. I keep doing that. It's my old habit. Okay. Next, the 7 planetary circulations are represented by the circumambulations of the Masonic Lodge. Okay, Scott, you can correct me on this. What I have is the circumambulations of the Masonic Lodge are the ritual clockwise movements of the candidates and officers around the altar in the lodge room, thus following the course of the sun. That's the idea behind it. This symbolizes the journey of life, the search for light, and the progression of knowledge. The number of circumambulations, depends on the degree being conferred. Is any of that true?
Yes.
Okay, good.
It's true. I don't know about 7. 7 doesn't show up that much in Masonry, but there are a few places, but I don't know if 7 circumambulation.
Well, it's a disconnect, it says, he talks about 7 planetary circulations, and he says the circumambulations of the Masonic Lodge are, and then he doesn't absolutely link it. 7 planetary circulations representative of the circumambulations. It's a soft link here. He doesn't say the 7 circumambulations of the Masonic Lodge.
Remembering he was 25 or so when he wrote this book, and he was not a Mason.
Oh, he wasn't a Mason yet. Oh, I didn't know that. Interesting.
And they
I
made
always
him
thought of him as a master Mason. Interesting. I see a hand.
Yeah, Janet, go ahead.
Yeah, when I heard this, I kept thinking of when we were talking about 7 lives, 7 whatever, 777.
Yeah.
That was going on, and where it came from in these different ancient mystery teachings. Does that make sense or not?
Oh, of course, yeah.
And then if you take 7 times 7, you get 49, but the 63 of all those symbols that were around the 7 pointed star equals 63, which is 14 more than 49. I just got into numerology in my head. But that's what I was thinking back then. And I didn't want to interrupt.
Well, 7 is, no, that's right. 7 is the quintessential number of magic. After all, 7th ray is the ray of order and magic, right? So you'll always find, and it's in this next part. By the marching of the Jewish priests 7 times around the walls of Jericho,
Jericho.
we really do get into the magical aspect here. This refers to, of course,
Right.
the biblical story wherein God told Joshua to have the priests carry the Ark of the Covenant and blow trumpets of ram's horns. Note the first array aspect of the Aryan ram, while the Israelite army marched around the city once a day for 6 days and 7
Right.
times on the 7th day. So then when the priest sounded a long blast and the army shouted, the walls of Jericho collapsed and the Israelites took the city. So this is really magical kind of stuff going on here. You can bet that there was a priest present, who was probably very quietly exuding sounding the note of what's called vril, which came up later. Who was that late 19th century alternative physics guy?
That was
Degrassi.
You know who I'm thinking of.
Come on.
Oh, come on. What is it? It's he had these mysterious machines and stuff. Anyway, it'll come. But this idea of vril, this magical sound that is the pure tone of yes, Tia, do you know?
No, just please finish your thought.
Oh.
No.
Yeah, there's this sound called vril, which is the vocal version of the tone of destruction, right? And it's supposed to be something that can't be resisted. It's only known to, of course, to very high initiates, and it suggests that there was a priest. It wasn't just ram's horns that knocked those walls down. There was some priest who was able to do that.
It was Bulwer Lytton.
Huh?
It was Edward Bulwer Lytton who wrote.
Bulwer Lytton. He wrote that. That's not the physicist I'm thinking of, but this is something we all know and we're not thinking of.
But he came up with the idea and the book.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yes, Tia.
I was going to say, I just can't shake the feeling as we're going through this and discussing this alchemy and this whole notion of 7, and you bringing up esoteric healing, the whole notion of the alchemist himself and his 7, centers, and the interrelation of how that energy worked out in the magical work that they were trying to achieve. When you had the visualization of the dragon that was sitting, the one that we flipped around a few times, at the very top, you see the highest, I think it's the highest achievement or expression, I think, in of the third eye that he's grasping, that's in his mouth, that upturned disc. I mean, the crescent. And so, and with the sun, suggesting to me the interaction of the head center. So, I mean, there was, because we're talking about, as we enter into the Aquarian age, this whole notion of white magic, and even the alchemists themselves, we don't really discuss the subtext of what was going on with them and how they were working their energies, I guess, the higher initiates, as far as working, producing that magical work. Or maybe it was just a code or a symbology to overlay or to disguise what was actually happening within those initiations.
Question. It's, I think the whole outer thing was real, but it's mostly a blind. You don't get enlightened by mixing stuff in a test tube. it was a allegory for inner processes, and we'll get into that next time, just with some effort to penetrate what these processes allegorized, so that, because that's more of more interest than the outer processes, right? Just what these processes, their analogous functions within our bodies in order to realize spirit, So, well, we are out of time, folks. Fascinating discussions. Thank you. Am I this far? I don't think so. Oh, yeah, we're here.
Okay, we had one comment from Magda. She says the Vril Daman were beautiful young women with a ponytail as an energetic antenna doing magical trafficking with the Nazi hierarchs.
Yikes. Yeah, there was some real perversion there of magic, by the group of 7 that incarnated at that time. So, yeah, let me just finish this. Next, and of the Mohammedan priests 7 times around the Kaaba at Mecca. Interestingly, whereas the Masons and the Jewish priests circumambulate clockwise, Mohammedans walk counterclockwise around the Kaaba, thus imitating the movement of the planets around the sun as viewed from above. In all 3 cases, 7 is ever the number of completion, representing outer demonstration of the one unified principle. With the Jews at Jericho, 7 was intrinsic to some specific magical process involving sound. And we'll pick up with the last statement here next time around. So could we get some dates?
Yes, the next webinar is going to be the Secret Doctrine on the 16th of July. When is your,
Yeah, it's actually,
before that is your treatise on cosmic fire.
this is the 14th, I believe. 15th, 14th, yeah. So
It should be.
they stack right up. We have TCF on Friday. We have the Secret Doctrine on Sunday. So they're coming
Right.
quick and fast, because
And this was it.
I was just
Yeah,
going to,
this was irregular for the Secret Teachings. And the next Secret Teachings is going to be on the 6th of August.
there you go. We'll be back on schedule, hopefully, at that point. So real good.
Yeah.
So thank you all for your involvement, especially. Thanks for coming, and but especially thanks for participating. It's always more interesting when we have discussions about these things than me just, lecturing you for an hour and a half. Okay, until next time, thank you all. Bye-bye. I'm going to read the chat right now.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.